Evelyn Carter came for a book, but instead faced humiliation from the manager, who had no idea she owned the entire mall. When the truth came out, his world crumbled, and no one anticipated where this would lead. The events that follow will shock even the most experienced. But let's start from the beginning. Evelyn Carter, a slim elderly woman with neatly styled silver hair, walked unhurriedly through the central gallery of the mall. Her steps were confident, her gaze calm, as one accustomed to life and its challenges. She enjoyed the familiar atmosphere, recalling how many years she had strolled these very corridors, unaware that today everything would change. Evelyn headed to her favorite bookstore, eager for her morning book selection. It was her usual ritual, spending time browsing the shelves, flipping through new arrivals and classic works. But the moment she stepped inside, her peace was disrupted. Richard, the store manager, immediately noticed her. A middle-aged man in an impeccable suit, he stood behind the counter, watching the customers. Upon seeing Evelyn, his expression changed, and his smile became strained. Richard slowly approached her, clearly showing that he wasn't pleased with her presence. "How can I help you?" he asked, stopping in front of her. His voice was polite, but there was a cold edge to it, and he struggled to maintain a pretense of friendliness. Evelyn, ignoring his hostility, responded politely. "I'd like to look at the new arrivals," her voice soft and confident, as if she hadn't sensed his disdain. But Richard pressed his lips together, eyeing her from head to toe as if evaluating her. He noted her modest but tidy coat and shoes, which didn't meet his idea of the right kind of customer for this store. "I'm sorry, but—" He paused deliberately, stretching the words. "I think this store might not be for you. We cater to a different clientele. Perhaps you could try the shops downstairs." Richard threw a dismissive glance to the side, as if that ended the conversation. Evelyn felt indignation rise within her, but she was used to such looks and words. She took a deep breath, keeping her composure. After a moment, she asked, looking Richard straight in the eyes, "For people like me? What exactly do you mean?" Richard shrugged slightly, his smile turning into a condescending smirk. "Well, you know, we carry a more upscale selection. I'm not sure it's what you're looking for." Those words hit like a blow. Evelyn held his gaze, but inside, she was boiling. She knew this moment was not just a coincidence. It was yet another example of how people in power, even in something as small as managing a store, felt entitled to judge others based on appearance, race, or stereotypes. Evelyn gave a measured nod, turned, and walked slowly out of the store. Her back straight, her head held high, though a storm of emotions raged inside. She didn't argue or protest, not yet. But she knew one thing. This was far from over. As Evelyn left the bookstore, she gripped her phone tightly. Her calm demeanor quickly transformed into firm resolve. She made a few phone calls, one of them to her old friend and the mall's general manager, David. Their conversation was brief, but to the point. Evelyn told him what had happened, her voice calm, yet filled with a quiet intensity. "He doesn't know who you are, does he?" David asked in disbelief. Evelyn chuckled softly. "No, he has no idea, but he'll find out soon enough." Meanwhile, Richard returned to the counter, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. He believed he had done the right thing, maintaining standards. In his mind, the store he managed was for more refined customers, and he thought his actions had upheld that status. He assumed the matter was over, but the next morning, everything changed. Richard was taken aback when he saw David enter the store with a group of people. Among them was Evelyn, looking even more composed and confident than during their last encounter. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. He knew David was the mall's general manager, but he couldn't grasp what was happening. "Richard," David began, stopping directly in front of him. "We need to discuss a serious incident that took place in your store yesterday." Richard frowned, trying to maintain a confident demeanor. "If this is about that woman who came in yesterday, I can explain." David raised his hand to stop him. "That woman is Evelyn Carter, and she owns this entire mall, including your store." Richard froze. His face went pale. "She owns?" he stammered, unable to believe his ears. Evelyn stepped forward, her gaze steady and unwavering as she looked at Richard. "I came into your store simply to buy a book," she said quietly, her voice sharp and cutting through the air like a knife. "But instead, I was met with contempt and humiliation. You judged me based on my appearance without bothering to find out who I really am." Richard tried to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. Richard stood there, stunned, his face drained of color as he realized that the woman he had insulted was the owner of the entire mall. The same thought kept hammering in his mind. How could I have been so wrong? "I didn't know," he began, trying to make his voice sound convincing, but with every word it became clearer that his confidence had vanished. "I didn't know who you were. I'm sorry." Evelyn's gaze remained steady, calm, but full of firm resolve. She straightened up, speaking with the authority of her years of experience and status. "That's exactly the point, Richard. You didn't know. But does that give you the right to treat people that way? You don't need to know who I am or who anyone else is to treat them with respect. You showed contempt based solely on appearance. That's unacceptable." Richard swallowed hard, realizing that a simple sorry wasn't going to fix this. Panic started to rise in his chest as he realized that every word he spoke only made the situation worse. He tried once more to defend himself. "I didn't mean any harm. It was a mistake. I just—" Evelyn raised her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "A mistake? Mistakes happen when you don't know better. But this wasn't a mistake. This was you thinking it's normal to judge people based on how they look, based on stereotypes. This isn't just about your personal attitude, Richard. It's a systemic problem. And people like you only keep it going." Richard felt the weight of Evelyn's words pressing down on him, as if the air in the store had grown thick and heavy. He was used to being the one in charge of his little world, but now his power was slipping away right before his eyes. He saw it in Evelyn's face. She was not just a customer. She represented a force he had never encountered before. David, who had been quietly watching the exchange, finally spoke, adding gravity to the situation. "Richard, we can't afford these kinds of mistakes in our mall. Evelyn and I have discussed what happened, and we've come to a decision. You can stay, but only on one condition." Richard glanced nervously at David, hoping his words offered a lifeline. "What condition?" he asked, feeling his control over the situation slipping away. David paused, making sure Richard understood the seriousness of what he was about to say. "You and your entire staff will be required to undergo training on diversity, inclusion, and respectful customer service. We'll be reviewing all internal service policies in this store and throughout the mall. Evelyn insisted on this, and I agree with her. This is your only chance to stay." Richard froze, feeling the fear and humiliation building inside him. He understood that this was the best he could hope for in the current situation. Losing this job could spell disaster for his career, and here, despite the humiliation, was a chance to make things right. Evelyn gave him one last look, preparing to leave the store. Her final words felt like a lesson. Respect shouldn't depend on who's standing in front of you. It's not something you get to choose when it's convenient. It must be the foundation of every interaction, whether it's with a wealthy customer or someone you think is unworthy. You need to learn this lesson, Richard. If you don't, next time, the consequences will be far more severe. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Richard standing in the store, fully aware that his life would never be the same. Richard stood frozen, watching as Evelyn disappeared through the doors of the store. He had never imagined finding himself in such a situation, humiliated before those he had once dismissed as unworthy, and now fully aware that his future was hanging by a thread. The following day, a team of diversity and inclusion specialists arrived at the store, hired at Evelyn's request. All the employees were gathered in a conference room, where they were about to undergo a series of training sessions. Richard felt uneasy, knowing that everyone was aware he was the reason for these changes. The first day of training was particularly painful for him. His staff, many of whom he considered friends, now looked at him with disdain. The training covered topics that Richard had previously thought irrelevant. respect for every customer, regardless of their appearance, race, or social status. "Richard," the trainer addressed him during one of the sessions, "how do you feel when you hear about bias and discrimination?" Richard hesitated. In the past, he would have brushed off such topics as unnecessary, but now the situation felt deeply personal. He realized something inside him was shifting. "I think," he began, uncertain. "I never really understood how important it was. I've always seen the world the way I was used to, but now I realize that's not enough." The instructor nodded, continuing the discussion with the group, but Richard knew this was a significant moment for him, a step towards acknowledging his own mistakes. The training sessions continued for weeks, and by the end the store had started to change. The customer service policies became more open and inclusive, and the atmosphere in the store grew warmer and more welcoming. Customers, regardless of their appearance, began to feel more comfortable, and this positively impacted the store's success. A month after the incident, Evelyn returned to the bookstore. The moment she walked in, she noticed the changes immediately. The staff was more courteous, the ambiance felt friendlier, and Richard, now more self-aware, greeted her at the entrance with a genuine smile. "Welcome back, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice now free of the arrogance he once displayed. "I'm glad to see you again." Evelyn nodded, taking a quick glance around the store before turning back to Richard. "Progress is evident," she said calmly. "But remember, this is just the beginning. Change takes time, but the most important thing is to maintain it." Richard nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had learned that true respect isn't something you display only when convenient. It's a fundamental value that should guide every interaction, no matter who stands before you. As Evelyn left the store, Richard realized that his encounter with her had not only altered his professional life, but had reshaped his personal worldview as well. He understood that real change would require constant effort, but he was determined to make it last. Though the story had started with a painful and embarrassing incident, it had led to something better. The bookstore became a place where everyone was welcome, and Richard had learned to approach the world with greater openness and understanding. Evelyn's influence had reached beyond a single conversation. It had sparked a transformation that would ripple through the store and perhaps even beyond.